Welcome back to Close Mode. I'm Dan Sanchez, and I'm here with Brian Dietmeyer, the host of the show. But now I get to turn the tables again, and I get to be the host of the show, as normally I'm the guy behind the curtain, the producer that Brian and sometimes the guests call and make fun of live on the show. But it's fun to get on the other side, and I've said this before, but I'm excited to dive into this topic because we were just talking about it with another guest, and I was like, oh, that's a topic in and of itself. And that is how to navigate procurement as a salesforce, because oftentimes procurement at the very end of the sales cycle, when you think you got this thing in the bag, procurement literally sandbags your bag. Just like is like, hello, no, start again from the beginning. You think you were at the end, but no, bam, they come and smack you, and you are back to ground one again. So Brian, what do we do to navigate procurement as a salesforce?
It might be important to sort of start with why I think I have something to say on this. And, you know, I ran a negotiation firm with a Harvard professor for years, and we worked with sales teams. And then we happened to start working with buyer teams, Allstate, American Airlines, Ford, Chevron. So as a lifelong salesperson, I felt like the fox in the hen house, right? To be in teaching negotiation to the dark side. And so I learned a lot about how they really function. And that's what brought me here. And it's interesting. I ran with a sort of tech data management company, a really cool session with 4 or 5 of the procurement team from this particular client and probably 7 or 8 of their global account managers, right? And we were sitting at a conference table. And we just kind of made up this idea and decided to run with it. And it's like, let's create this cross dialogue between buyers and sellers in this organization to learn more about one another. One of the coolest things, I know you always love takeaways on these. This would be one takeaway that I want to give right at the top of the hour. Pull together, maybe just a couple people from your procurement organizations, a couple of your key account management types or whoever, and start a dialogue about what really happens at procurement. And one
in
of
their
the
own company. Go pull people from their own company from procurement?
Because it's a safe environment, And so here's an example. So we were, of course, we had a series of questions to guide this discussion, and everybody was sort of playing nice, and sales, I'm sorry, most salespeople can't stand procurement, right? The terrible
the
statement. It's the enemy. And like, oh, I'm going to have to hand you over to procurement is like, the world is over. But so everybody was playing nice. And at one point, I'll never forget, one of the GCM's global customer managers, she stood up and said, you know what really pisses me off? When I've been selling to the business for 6 months and the deal's about closed and I get turned over to you guys. And I was like, okay, cool. Now we're actually talking about some stuff here. And the odd thing to me was the procurement folks sort of looked to their left and their right. One woman put her head down and sort of shook like this, and the other two were snickering with each other. And I said, what the hell just happened over there? Right? The way you react to that. And they said, you know what happens when you've sold to the business sends the deal to us to get the deal done. By and large, the worst thing in my life as a procurement person is to get kind of a pre-sold deal turned over from the business, because I'm supposed to get this deal done in a way that's economically feasible, and that sort of thing. But I don't want to go back and say, that deal you sent to me, I screwed it up, but I went and found another one. So that it's understanding. I call this approach speaking the language of procurement, and you and I should talk about this a little bit. Really understanding how procurement functions. That was the first thing that opened up in my mind. I ended up writing a couple books with a supply chain manager on for procurement, how they should negotiate. So we do have some insight in this, but they function so differently. That one reaction from those procurement professionals at that table opened up my eyes. Now, when I hear I'm getting turned over to procurement, there's a big chunk of me that says my deal is getting way down the line. They turned it over to procurement to get the deal done. We can talk about discounting and all that stuff, but they turn it over to get it done. And it's actually a good sign if you know how to talk to procurement and if you know what they really care about.
That makes sense. Because if you don't know, then you're winging it, and winging it's probably not going to lead to the optimal results, right? Because procurement understands you. They understand sales.
Yes.
They deal with you guys all the time. These are professional buyers, which means they're always working with salespeople.
Yep. And it's
You
and
need
it
to learn their side in order to actually navigate the relationship and do the dance appropriately.
Yeah, yeah, and it's even worse, I think, than you stated, because we're not only winging it in absence of knowing how they really function. We're reacting to and getting anchored on the conversation they want to have, which is lower your price by 10%, or your competitor just came in and undercut you by 10. In the absence of really knowing anything about this buying influence, this is another problem. We think about, the business as the buying influences and these people as like a pain in our butt. And they're a legit buying influence that have legit concerns, and we need to understand those. And if we don't, we're going to react to the conversation they want to have, which is, I can get the same thing from someone else cheaper. And in absence of knowing much about them, now they're controlling the entire conversation about where this deal's go, which will drive heavily the outcome.
Yep. And I've heard it said recently from a friend who works at like an enterprise level company, massive company. And she's like, if I'm sending you to procurement, that means I'm betting like a big piece of my relational
Yeah.
equity in my company
Yep.
on doing this, because once it goes to procurement at a big company, like it's hard to get through, which means they're fighting for it. They're the internal champion now, and they're going to bat. So you've done the necessary work of pre-selling them but you needed that in order to get them to fight for you through the procurement process. So it's a huge part, but now you have to actually get that part done. What do you think the result is of having to learn procurement and dancing with procurement? Like what do you increase your win rates because of this? Does it become a smoother process? Does it become an enjoyable process? Like
Right.
what's the end result look like of learning how to do this well?
So we call it changing the conversation. So in the absence of this, we're going to have the conversation they want to have, which we all know. Anyone that's listening, watching knows it's okay. Got turned over to procurement. Find me 5% somewhere. I need my pound of flesh. If we change the conversation, we change the outcome. If that's the conversation we're having, then guess what? The outcome is going to be some kind of discount. Yes, but changing the conversation, this is important to understand. The first procurement client we had was a major airline, and they had just won Procurement Organization of the Year by Procurement Magazine, which I saw in the lobby while I was waiting to go in, which made me even more scared. It's like, how the hell am I going to help these guys buy stuff? They're evidently the Procurement Organization of the Year. But in their lobby, they had like 87% customer satisfaction up on the wall. And I don't know, you, Dan, or anybody else listening, if I had no clue sort of what that meant, and ended up, talking to Karen Holman, was the woman's name, who was driving procurement at the time and driving this initiative. Internal customer sat is the people they're buying on behalf of, which, by the way, is the business that we're selling to. Their customers and our customers are the same. And this is a thing that we miss. And we both care about buying the right solution at the right price. So we have this thing in common. They don't. So it's funny when I run these sessions with reps, I will ask them, so first of all, who are the internal customers? And we have to get to this point of going, it's the buyers, the same people we want to get to. It's the business. And then secondly, how do they determine that they're almost 90% happy with procurement? And most reps will say, because they got a low price. So imagine procurement is asked to go source laptops for reps, and they go out and they buy the cheapest laptops available. And I tell the story, and sometimes salespeople are like, yeah, my procurement did. But if they buy the cheapest laptop available, their internal customer sat is going to be terrible. And the next time they need to source something, they're not going through procurement, and they're going to make procurement less relevant. So in this situation, what the buyer would do is say, who are my internal customers, right? It's the VP of sales, it's the salespeople, it's the IT folks. And they're going to go to them and they're going to understand their needs and say, give me the decision criteria I should be using when I'm trying to make a choice between suppliers. And of course, price is always one of those things, but I will tell you, price is rarely in the top 3 on the inside for the deals that I've consulted against, unless it's a pure commodity. It's pencils at American Airlines, but price is now, that's what the procurement professional leads with, and that's the discussion we end up having. We need to change the discussion. And if we know stuff, we've been selling to the business, and Dan, you're the procurement professional, and I'm saying, okay, I've also been talking to some of those same internal customers, can I share with you some of what they said is important in this buy? Because that's also important to them. So again, if procurement buys the cheapest laptops out there and they don't work, it's going to fail. That isn't how they buy. They all use a weighted attribute decision matrix where they're force ranking and weighting criteria, and then looking at a supplier overall, like TCO score or overall value. They've got software that calculates value, but then they come to us and say, same thing, cheaper. What's going on behind the curtain of Oz? We've got to be able to speak that language and understand what is internal customer sat, how is that measured, and hopefully that quick story I gave you helps illuminate that a little bit. And there's a couple more areas we should chat about, but I want to make sure that one's clear first.
In some ways, it's actually easier if you understand how they're working, because procurement's purely objective. They're not buying it for them. It's not their reputation at stake.
Bingo.
Right. So they're just looking at it objectively, logically, which, since we know that, we can play to our advantage. And that's where the pre-homework comes in. Like, hopefully you did your homework, you know who the stakeholders are, you know what the requirements are, and you have your own little Excel sheet keeping track of all those things. So when you're comparing Excel sheets with procurement, you could be like, can you go get the same thing cheaper? Tell me about that.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
But do they check off these 3 requirements from these 2 stakeholders? They don't. Well, so you can't get the same thing for the thing cheaper. And all of a sudden they're like doing the logic. They're like, well, what's that worth to us? And now you're like, that's why we priced higher. It's starting to make sense in my head, Brian. Is that how it goes?
And there's a diplomatic way to do that. You're right on all that. And any good sales methodology has you do stakeholder mapping. And, what are these stakeholders looking for? The procurement wants that map, especially if you've done better due diligence than they have. You can share them.
Their Excel sheet.
Yeah. So there is a way to share that without saying, hey, we're better on this criteria with this stakeholder. They told me. There's a more subtle and diplomatic way to do that, which is changing the conversation.
I'm not a sales guy, so I don't know what those are. But
you're right. Your idea is right. It's just the execution to say, it's funny. I was talking to the CISO the other day, and she said, blam, blam, blam. And I just want to share that with you. Like, these are really important criteria, even before we start talking about me. Another thing that procurement cares about that I will often ask salespeople in a group session is share of spend. What does that mean? Speaking the language of procurement, internal customer sat, who are they? Why do they get to that sat level? We have to understand that. Share of spend. Most reps I talk to, and even leaders, are not sure, but after a few questions, they can get to the point. It's what's the total expenditures of the company? What percentage of that goes through procurement? The higher percentage that goes through procurement, the more relevant procurement is. That concept makes sense, right? And so they care about that. If they're buying crappy stuff, their share of spend goes down, their relevance goes way down. So there's this direct correlation between relevance, share of spend, and internal customer sat. So you want to be more relevant. And if your whole job in life as procurement is to simply find 5% more, and you do that by buying the cheapest stuff, they don't. They just don't. Even reverse auctions. Anyone who's ever been part of that piece of trash where all the suppliers get on there and they fight to see who can bid lowest and the lowest bidder wins. Oftentimes it's the number 3. It's not the lowest. It's 3 rungs up from the bottom that gets the business, because procurement knows the people who bid lowest are not going to be able to service them. I know this from consulting to them. So we just need to understand they do care about business fit and business solutions. And they want to get that at the best possible TCO and the highest possible value. And again, they've got software. The procurement professional of today is these 23-year-olds coming out of, I think it's ASU, like their strategic sourcing program. This isn't the grumpy old dude in the basement anymore. These are folks that are running value calc analysis and probably understand your value and impact on their business better than they do, but they're just talking to the conversation they want to have is price. We need to have a conversation about share of spend, what drives share of spend, internal customer sat, what do we share in common, what we share, we can get to price at some point, but I'm just telling you, unless you're selling a pure commodity, on average, lowest price doesn't win with procurement bids.
So procurement is not the enemy. Make them your friends. Start with even getting to know procurement at your own company. Have some conversations. Take them out to lunch a few times. Get to know them, because the more you know them, their pain points, and what they're going through, the more you can help them win. And in turn, they will help you win. Brian, thank you so much for sitting down with me and elaborating on how sellers can actually better navigate procurement.
Thanks. I love this subject. It's a pain for a lot of sales reps, so I'm glad we're talking about it.